Donald Trump suggested the United States military disguise its aircraft as Chinese property and then use those planes to bomb the S out of Russia in order to foment a war. Speaking to a crowd of wealthy donors at the Republican National Committee's New Orleans retreat on Saturday night, the former president joked that one way to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine was to distract it with a conflict with China. He suggested taking American F-22 jets, putting the Chinese flag on them and bomb the S out of Russia, according to CBS News. And then we say, China did it, Trump added as the crowd laughed. Then they start fighting with each other, and we sit back and watch. The former president also called Russian leader Vladimir Putin's unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine a massive crime against humanity and criticized the West's NATO alliance as a paper tiger. Paper tiger is used to describe something that appears threatening but is significantly weaker in reality. During his time in office, Trump had repeatedly disparaged NATO, forcing aides to scramble to keep him from pulling the U.S. out of the defensive treaty. It comes as Russian airstrikes and shell fire continue to bombard Ukraine cities, with hundreds of civilians believed to be dead. Its President Volodymyr Zelensky warned on Sunday morning that Moscow's troops may bomb the port city of Odessa. Trump asked on Saturday night, "At what point do we cannot take this massive crime against humanity?" We can't let it happen. We can't let it continue to happen. The former president ratcheted up his rhetoric around Russia's strongman ruler after being criticized for calling the autocrat's plan to invade a sovereign nation genius and savvy. Then Trump voiced his support for Ukraine at last week's CPAC event, where he said he was praying for the proud people of Ukraine and expressed admiration for Zelensky, calling him a brave man. God bless them, they are indeed brave, as everyone understand this horrific disaster would never have happened if our election was not rigged and if I was president, he said. The ex-president knocked Biden for being grossly incompetent and poked fun at Biden's threat of sanctions, saying Putin's been getting sanctioned for the past 25 years. The world hasn't been this chaotic since World War II, Trump said. On Saturday, Putin escalated his rhetoric in his confrontation with the West, saying that sanctions against Russia are tantamount to a declaration of war and threatening to treat any country that declares a no-fly zone over Ukraine as part of the conflict. Meanwhile, Zelensky has been urging NATO's leaders to impose such a restriction on its skies. Western leaders have thus far been hesitant. The threats came as Moscow's brutal assault on Ukraine saw a mass civilian evacuation from the city of Mariupol derailed when Russian forces ignored a promised humanitarian ceasefire and continued shelling the southern city. The number of Ukrainians forced from their country grew to 1.4 million. The United Nations says more than 350 civilians have been killed since Russia's invasion last week, while Ukrainian officials have said that at least 2,000 have perished. On Saturday, Zelensky repeated his plea for NATO to establish a no-fly zone in a meeting with the U.S. Congress, but the idea faces strong bipartisan opposition in America, and NATO leaders have rejected it, pointing out that it would draw the alliance into direct military confrontations with nuclear-armed Russia. A no-fly zone could only be enforced by shooting down Russian aircraft, and Putin on Saturday made clear that he would view such a move as joining the conflict. "We'll instantly view them as participants in a military conflict," the Russian leader told a group of female employees of Russian airlines, according to Russian state media. "We'll view any movement in this direction as involvement in an armed conflict by the country from whose territory threats to our military service members are posed." At the same meeting, Putin issued bellicose threats in response to the punishing economic sanctions leveled against his country by the US and Europe. "These sanctions that are being imposed are like the declaration of war," said Putin. "A lot of what is happening now, of what we now see and what we face is undoubtedly a means of fighting against Russia.